Right. We're going holding by the Book of Leviticus chapter 18. Again, we're holding by the Book of Leviticus chapter 18. We're in verse 4. Again, we're holding by the Book of Leviticus chapter 18, verse 4. And we spoke last week about this idea of doing the mitzvahs for the sake of this world or the next world. The Torah says, Es mishpatai tasu, es ukosai, tishmaru laleches, bahem ani Hashem Elokechem. So here, again, the Torah says, you should do my judgments, keep my ordinances, things that, don't make sense. Walk there within, I am the eternal your God. So, Rashi said before, as we mentioned, that things that we do are conformity with human feeling of justice. Yeah, that we should keep them even if we're not, even the Torah didn't have to tell me, like, don't kill, don't steal, so to speak. The Torah doesn't have to tell me that, right? Nonetheless, even though the Torah doesn't have to tell me, it tells me anyway. And to keep these ordinances, these things which don't make sense, decrees of the king, right? Others, the evil nation is going to raise objections and say, why should we observe them? Against the nations of the world, they're going to raise objection. They're going to say, why can't you eat pig? Why can't you wear clothing, a mixture of wool and linen, i.e. shatnez, water, mingled with the ashes of the red heifer? And therefore it says, I'm the Lord your God, right? I've enacted this for you, so you have an obligation to keep it. And to walk in them means you not free yourself from their environment, i.e. you shouldn't say, acquire Jewish wisdom, now acquire the wisdom of other peoples, other nations, right, etc. We spoke about that. And as we said before, we finished up the Ramban. We talked about this world and the next, right, and doing mitzvahs for the sake of reward. We spoke about that. Comes along the Kli Yakar. Kli Yakar, one of the great commentaries on the Torah. The Kli Yakar says like this. Kli Yakar says, like this, that he mentions that here it says, what's the Torah tell me? The Torah says, the beginning is mishpatai tatsu v'eschukosai tishmer. What's the order? The order is I keep the laws that make sense. Mention that first. I got an obligation to keep the laws that don't make sense right afterwards. So here says the Kli Yakar, first of all, mentions the mishpati, clears the laws that make sense. Mentions the first before chukim. Yeah, before laws that don't make sense. Right? But then, in the next verse, which we'll get there, I don't know when, but we'll get there, it says, verse 5, Shmarta Meschu Kodsai. That's Mishpatai, opposite order. Right? This verse says the words Mishpatai first, things that I understand, the laws I understand. And then it says Hu Kodsai, laws I don't understand. Very good. And the next verse is the opposite. Right? It says Hu Kodsai. Yeah, it says Hu Kodsai before Mishpatai. What's different? What's the difference in order? The first verse, what's it telling me? First verse over here, verse 4. What does it tell me? It's talking about the rewards a person's going to get in this world. Now, normally we say, Sar mitzvah ba'ayal maleka. The rewards a person's going to get in this world, you don't get. Normally you don't get the reward for the mitzvah in this world unless, it could be that a person will get rewards. They'll get rewards if they do it, or they get part of the mitzvah in this world, part of the reward, if they do a great joy. Yeah, but in general, you're not going to get reward in this world, right? In general, that's not going to happen. But nonetheless, he says, what's the first verse telling me? What's verse 4 telling me? He says the mitzvahs that you do that make sense, and the ones that don't make sense. What is it telling me? It's telling me the reward you're going to get in this world. Why? How's the Kli Yakar know? Where does he know it from? Because what's the next word in the verse? The next word in the verse is lalechet bahem, to go in their ways, right? To go in their ways. Yeah, so what? Right? Who cares? So that's what the words tell me. What does it mean to go the walk, so to speak? Says the Kli Yakar over here. Well, how do I know it's talking about this world? Because he said this world. What does it talk about? It talks about Adam Mahole or Adam Mahale. That a person that walks in this world. So when it says Lalechet Bahem, right, what's it a reference to? This world. It's talking to this world, physical universe. That a person goes up level by level, right, raises himself, level by level, right, as it says in Zechariah chapter 3, verse 7. He says, I gave to you Mahalchim ben Oimdim Ha'eleh, ones that walk. I placed the ones that walk before the ones that stand there. Now, who's he talking about? If you're talking about someone who walks, you're talking about a human. Yeah? That's why it says Lalechet Bam. Means someone who walks. Who walks? We walk. Right? Animals technically also walk, but it's talking about humans. Now, the verse in Zechariah says, those who walk between those that stand. Very good. Who stands? Who stands? Angels. Because he says an angel is considered someone who stands. Because why? What does an angel do? An angel stands only on one level. Angels don't go up or down in levels. Angels are stagnant. In other words, they're created. They're messengers. God uses them as messengers. And there are different levels, the Ramchal says, in Derech Hashem. There are different levels of angels. Some are on a higher level. Some are on a lower level. Yeah. God designates which ones are higher level, lower level, or whatever. But they don't change. They change what they do. God can send this angel to do this. Send another angel to do that. They don't multitask. Right? Angels do not multitask. So therefore, they can only do one thing at a time. Okay. But you have angels. You have angels of destruction. You have angels that sing God's praises all day. You got angels at different levels. Yeah, but they don't change. No matter what they do, God does not change the level. Right? So says the Ramchal and Derech Hashem, they don't change. And that's what he echoes over here. Because an angel is considered someone who stands. Yeah. But they stand on one level. What does it mean they stand on one level? They stand on level means they don't change. They stay at their level. Even if there's a hierarchy of angels. Even if there are different levels of angels. Very good. But angels normally stand. They're not moving about, so to speak. They're not changing levels. But he says, what about a person? What about a human? He said a person is called someone who walks, someone who goes. Angel just stands there, he doesn't go. So similarly says Kli Yakar, L'olam Haba, the next world, is also called that a person sits. What does that mean? Right, this world, we walk around. In the spiritual world, we sit. Why? Right? What's going on? So it brings down the Gemara from Brachas 17a. He said, Tzadikim, righteous people, sit with crowns on their head. And they're getting their rewards. They're basking in God's glory, whatever that means. Yeah, but they're sitting. They're sitting with a crown on their head. Now, what's it telling you? There's two different things here. There's a person that walks, right? There's a person that walks. There's who we call humans. There are spiritual forces, angels that stand. They don't change levels. But you have people that sit as well. Who's that? That we're talking about the righteous in the world to come. Right? They're in the world to come, sitting with a crown on their head. And what are they doing? They sit. Interesting, he says they sit as an example of their standing. What does that mean? What does that mean? They sit with menucha, with eternal rest. In other words, they acquired their completeness. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that a person is in this world to toil. We always say, for as Ramchal says, and in Derech Hashem, he says, there's a minimal level, which we don't know what that is. There's a minimal level to reach in order to have a portion of the world to come. Minimal level. Okay. All right, very good. Very good. There's a minimal level. Yeah, there's a minimal level. So therefore what? Once the person, if they have to go to Gehenna, if they have to go to hell, what happens? They get their soul fixed up. In other words, they're going there because of sins they've done. But it's a process. It's a tikkun, right? It's considered a process of fixing up the soul. Now, since it should be something left in the soul, hopefully, then we'll have its portion of the world to come. So therefore, once the soul gets purged, that's the word I was thinking of, it gets purged of all its sins. So then it'll go into the next world. It'll have a portion of the next world, sitting with the crown on its head. Yeah, but what does that mean? It means they reached their potential. Right? In other words, righteous people, they're going to have a greater portion than everyone else. Okay. But it's all about trying to reach potential. Now, don't we fail at some level reaching potential? Right? Most people probably fail at some level. Yeah? But to get a portion of the world to come, right? Even if you have to go to Gehenna, even if you have to go to hell, let's say for maximum 11 months to get the soul fixed up, yeah, and the soul comes out intact, very good. So then you say that it reached its perfection. Right? Now, shouldn't it be at the highest level? So you're telling me if it reached its perfection, it should be a much higher level. Not true. It can reach perfection to the extent where it did what, it might have failed in different ways. Right? But it reached a certain portion. That's called completeness. That's called shleimusa. Right? The word shalem, to be complete, to be whole. Right? So therefore what? That soul's getting its reward and is resting in the next world, learning Torah from God himself, and reach completeness. Now, completeness can be different levels. Can be different levels for different people. Yeah, but they reached a certain level that what happened? That they got into the next one. Whatever that level is. Some are going to reach a higher level. Some are lower level, but in order to get there, you need to reach a minimal level. Now it comes on the Ramchal. Now the Ramchal does not tell you what that minimal level is. He doesn't tell you. Yeah, but there's some minimal level a person has to reach in order to have a portion of the world to come. Now that being said, since we don't know what it is, can anybody rest on their laurels? No. You got to keep plugging. Now, for most people, if they're trying to do the right thing, they should have a portion of the world to come. Now, there are things that can stop a person from getting a portion of the world to come. It can be very severe, right? But, someone asked last week or the week before, could it be that, if a Jew wastes time when they could have been learning, right, once, that'll take them out from the world to come? No. God's not going to zap him like that. It's a pretty severe prohibition, right? Jerusalem Talmud says that God can look the other way on a number of things. God can look the other way on the big three. You have to give up your life for any time, any place, right? Murder, idolatry, or immorality. So if a non-Jew or a Jew put a gun to a Jew's head and says, I want you to kill this person, we're going to kill you, you have to die, right? You have to be willing to die. So the Jerusalem Talmud says God can overlook all these big three that you have to give up your life for any time, any place. But there's one thing God does not look the other way on. And that is someone who wastes time when they could have learned. Only God knows that. What's inside a person's soul, what they could have done, should have done, etc. Right? That God does not overlook. Right? That the punishment is very severe. But it's not so severe, God's going to say, okay, you did this once, let's say. Probably did it a lot of times, but let's say you did it once. With all the mitzvahs that a person did, hopefully in this world, that's not going to negate the fact they get a portion of the world to go. Should not negate the fact. Depends on the person's level. Yeah? But it wouldn't be so fear, if the person's working on themselves, even though we fail, even though we make mistakes. God's going to say, you know what, too bad. You're at a certain level. You're not a potato farmer in Idaho. No offense, anyone's a potato farmer. Grew up in Idaho. You're not on a low level. You know better. You should know better. Right? The consequences are much more severe now. Okay. So that's true. Ignorance isn't bliss over here. You don't get a free pass anymore. Or free pass for some things that a person might have done, even if they don't know anything. Certain things they're not going to get a free pass for. Okay. But in general, somebody like that, they're on a different level now. They're coming close to God. The punishment could be absolutely severe, right? You want to be close to the king, you get burnt, right? We see that by Nadav and Avihu, right? Leviticus chapter 10, right? We spoke about that. Korban Aaron says, you want to be close to the king, you get burnt, right? Different reasons why potentially they died. That's not the point, right? The point is, what happened? What did they do? They were very close to the king, very, very close to the king. If whatever they did wrong, they deserve to die. Now, if somebody does something wrong, at their level, it's a minor thing in God's eyes. Okay, so, or, the king's eyes, let's say. So the king gets lackeys to deal with them. Very good. Yeah, he's not going to get his hands dirty himself. Depends what he did, but in general, it's not going to be the case. So what happens? What happens over here? So a minor thing, okay, there'll be payback, but not going to be as severe. But if you're second in command, if you're second in charge, the king can say, look, you made a mistake. Could be an egregious mistake. Yeah, could be an egregious mistake. So God says, you know what? Or the king says, you look better without a head. Now, why is he going to get punished more severe? It's more severely because he's got greater responsibility, right? He's got greater responsibility. And greater responsibility, the repercussions are much different. Much, much different. Right? So a person could say, well, before I came to Torah mitzvahs, in general, my life was pretty bad as it was. Okay. Yeah, could very well be. Could very well be. But there are people whose lives don't seem so bad. They got money, fame, I don't know. They got a lot of things going for them. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean it's perfect. When they come to Torah mitzvahs, it's a different ballgame. It's a different ballgame altogether. Person is held more accountable for what they do. Why? Because they have a higher recognition. Yeah, they're not a potato farmer in Idaho anymore. Yeah, they know better. They know more. It doesn't matter if they're at the beginning, the very beginning, taking teeny steps. They have a higher recognition. God is going to judge the person where he's at. He's not going to judge on future potential. Where do we learn it out? From Yishmael, right? Because the angels said God should kill him, when he's dying of thirst, right? So at the end of the verse says, Basher Husham, where he is right now. Yeah, where he is holding right now. So God says, the angels, Rashi brings us down, and God says, the angels, I'd love to kill him, and I know he's going to cause problems in the future. His offspring going to cause problems to Jewish people. Very good. Is he guilty? No, not guilty. Right? So I said, God says you can't kill him. Right? He's not guilty over here. Right? So we don't go according to future, we don't go according to future potential. But at the end of the day, there's greater responsibility. Again, a person can say, my life was miserable before, it's just as miserable now. But now, why is it worse? Why is it worse? Because now I feel worse for what I've done. Now I know better. Okay. But people think, I'm going to change my life. God's going to see I'm trying whatever. It's going to make everything good. Doesn't mean that. That one doesn't mean that. Life can be a grind either way. Yeah, but you get greater responsibility. Once you have greater responsibility, the stakes are different. Right? You know better. The Gemara says, just put this in context, because people think the hardest part of the conversion process is actually going through the process and not converting. Right? That's the hardest part. Right? Is actually, I shouldn't say not converting, but actually, finishing and converting. Well, really, the hardest part is afterwards, because now, everything up until this point, right, is all for practice. Right? It's all for fun, so to speak. Now, once you convert, for better or for worse, you're now a full-fledged Jew if it's done right. If it's done right, you're a full-fledged Jew. Guess what? The stakes are much higher now. It comes on the Gemara and says, why do converts have it so hard after conversion? People say, what do you mean? If I already have it so hard now, what's it going to be like later? Okay. But why do they have it so hard then? After conversion? Right? And one reason is because they didn't learn what they were supposed to before. They didn't learn properly. But that doesn't mean the Beis Din should not have converted them. They were ready to convert. Pretty much they were ready. We're not going to blame it on the rabbinical court here. They were pretty much ready, but they still didn't, the Beis Din does not expect the person's going to learn everything. And they're going to know everything, backwards and forwards. They want to see they have a certain working knowledge. The Shabbos, kashrus, other things. They want to see they have a certain working knowledge. Right, of how Jewish law works. Can they read Hebrew? Other things. Very good. Yeah. They don't expect them to be perfect. Okay. So you say, but maybe someone should convert only when they know everything, verbatim. That will take you, 40 years, 50 years. It can take you longer before a person really gets everything down. But it doesn't matter. Right? That's not even the point. Right? The point is they didn't learn what they were supposed to properly. They didn't review. They didn't go through it. They could have had the knowledge. Right? I'm not going to blame the teacher here, right? They could have had the knowledge, but they didn't put it into practice. Yeah. Or they took shortcuts, or any number of things, right? Any number of things over here. Nonetheless, they have to hit a certain level. And once, Beis Din thinks they hit a certain level, okay. But why does it get worse? Why should it get worse? Now you got great responsibility, but the person gets all confused now. Which blessing do I make here? What do I do over here? And they didn't learn it properly. Punishment's worse. Right? So you got to say, well, so it'll take me longer to convert. Who cares? But people don't say that. I very rarely hear that. Some people will say, it takes me a few extra years. Okay. Once the time is ticking, I'm not saying the person's much older. It doesn't matter. Once time is ticking, they want it done. They don't want to be pushed around. They don't want Beis Din not to call them. They want to be done. Yeah? Everybody wants everything to be done yesterday. And the Beis Din owes me. Beis Din should have called me. Beis Dins are busy. Yeah, I'm not saying they should just, not call anyone back after months. right? Maybe they're doing it as a test, okay, but you got to be, in my language, got to be a little bit of a nudnik. You got to, be on top of them and be in their face a little bit, right? Nonetheless, they don't owe you anything, right? But everybody, a lot of people, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people complain. They complain. They say it's not fair. They should be getting back to me. Look what I've been doing. I can't wait on. Okay, yeah, but it's going to be held against you. Remember, even if they convert you, and you're not really ready, but they convert you anyway, it's not their fault. We're not going to blame the base in there. It's not their fault. They say, okay, brother, been learning for a certain amount of time, right? They're in a community for a certain amount of time, very good. Start asking some questions, they have a certain level of knowledge, very good, they convert them. Okay. So the person says, wow, finally, it's done, right? Finally finished after all these years, all the push-aways, all the negativity. Yeah? And what happened? They fall flat in their face. So why do they fall flat in their face? Why do they get punished severely? Right? Why do they get punished severely? Sometimes. Because they weren't ready. They didn't have the requisite knowledge. But it's not the base's fault. Right? According to the Gemara itself, according to the code of Jewish law, all they have to know is a few laws here, a few laws there, and that's enough. Yeah, technically speaking, we don't do that. Right? We want people to, to know, to have thorough knowledge. It doesn't have to take 5 years. But they have to know enough, because if they don't know enough, they are going to transgress, and they're going to transgress severe prohibitions. Yeah? So you say, what changed? So it could be, I heard someone say, it could be true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying it's the answer. But, 300, 400, 500 years ago, they didn't need to learn that much. Why not? Because they could have learned from other people through osmosis. They could have seen how other people act, what they do, they could have learned. Today, you can't say that. They were on a much lower level, you can't say that. Possibly an answer. Yeah? But if we would go according to what the Gemara says, and what the code of Jewish law says, and only teach them a little bit, you'd all be dead. Anyone who converted would be, I should say, everyone here, anyone who converted with that minimal knowledge, you toast. God would toast you. You don't have the knowledge. You don't even have close to the knowledge. Yeah? So we don't do that. Right? And I hear this all the time. You don't have to know this much. Okay? And according to the Torah, according to the Gemara, you don't have to know that much. Very good. Yeah, what's going to happen on a regular basis? Let me ask the $1 million question. What is going to happen on a regular basis? You go to the mikveh, you come out, you convert. Okay. Now, 100%, you got to work on controlling your thoughts. Now you have to work on lessons on a daily basis. You don't want to screw up. You don't want to mess up over here. Yeah? And the laws of Shabbos. How well do you really know the laws of Shabbos? Yeah? And what's going to happen? You're going to see. Person may see, you know what? I don't know it as well as I thought. But, but everybody wants conversion to be done yesterday. Nobody wants to wait. I get it. People get older. They want to get married. Very good. Remember one thing. Remember anything. Remember one thing. Right? And that is it can come back to bite you also. Yeah? And again, this is not the Basin's fault. Basin's not going to get the fault over here. Right? Because this person showed their knowledge. Very good. Right? That means you got to continue learning afterwards. That means you can't rest on your laurels, because if you do, and you forget, you're going to get judged 100% as a Jew. Yeah? What you think, what you say, what you do, right? Now it's all or nothing. Right? Before it's all practice. Very good. Right? And I hear this all the time. It's taking too long. They don't answer my calls. This, that, and the other. Okay. Yeah? Legitimate. I'm not going to say not. Maybe they're pushing you off too much. Whatever the case is. But you can get burnt. You can seriously get burnt, if they convert you and you're not ready. Yeah? So what's better? Now people will say, I'd rather be Jewish. I want to be Jewish. I want to move on with life. Very good. Comes at a price. Remember, comes at a price. Could come at a severe price. Because now, the stage is very different. Your relationship to God is very different. Right? Now it's legitimate 100%. You're no different than me. You get up in the morning, you got to wash your hands. You got to say, you got to say Modani. You got to wash your hands. You got to make the blessing coming out of the bathroom. you have to say morning prayers. You have to say blessing over the Torah. You got to go to synagogue if you're a guy. There are a lot of things you got to do now. Now it's for real. Now it's for real. Day after, written, it's real. See, before, you don't really have such an evil inclination. Why? Because, a person, wants to pray, they don't want to pray, they keep kosher, they don't keep kosher, they do this, they don't do that. Right? It's important to be consistent. Very good. Very, very good. Yeah. But it's all make believe. It's all for fun right now. There's no obligation. There's a major difference when you have an obligation. The totally different evil inclination. Doesn't mean you don't have an evil inclination now. Doesn't mean the evil inclination went out the window. What it means is once a person converts, it's all for real, the evil inclination on a different level. Different level. Right? Everything, it's a different playing field. I'll give an example. Give for all you Americans out there, I'll give you a baseball metaphor. Yeah. Someone starts out, they come out of college. They come out of college, they get drafted, let's say. They get lucky, they get drafted by a major league team. They start in the big leagues? No. Right? Start in single A. Right? I think. It starts single A ball. Right? Then when they get better, they're doing good, they go to double A. Right? After double A, they get to triple A, and then they get to the majors. Right? It's step by step by step. Right? Step by step. Someone, coming out of college does not go into the pros straight away. Now, it could be you have someone 19, 20, let's say 21, that's like a major phenom, whether they're great at hitting or pitching or whatever, right? Whatever it is, they could come up through the ranks very quickly. In other words, they, in 1 year, in theory, potentially, they could make it into the majors. It's rare. It's very rare that should happen. There are some people they've able to do it. But there are many people stay in the minor leagues for years. The player used to play for the Red Sox. It was Wade Boggs. Anyone remember who Wade Boggs is? He didn't come up to the majors till he's 27. I think he was 27. Yeah, having one of the greatest pure hitters of all time. Doesn't matter. He didn't get up to the majors. Again, we'll keep this relatively simple. He didn't come up to the majors till he was 27. Yeah, most people do not make it to the majors. It takes them a couple years. Easily takes them a couple years. So again, I'm not saying the process has to take forever, right? But right now it's a different evil inclination. Once person converts, once it's game over and now it's for real, you can't ask this question now. Right? This question will have no relevance because now you're a full-fledged Jew. Now, what you think really matters. What you say really matters. How you say it, what you do matters. As a non-Jew, okay, it matters to a point. But all the, many things Kaufman would say are moral imperatives, not obligatory. Yeah? So when a person does things, either they do it right, they're inconsistent, they, building blocks, this and that, very good. Yeah, they're not going to be able to do everything at once. Okay. But even with all that, even within all that, what happens after conversion is done? After conversion is done is now you have the same obligations I do. Same exact obligation, right? If you're a guy. Women have different obligations, okay, but they have a lot of obligations also. A lot of obligations. They have to pray at least once a day. They're going to make blessings every day, right? They're going to keep Sabbath. They're going to keep festivals. You got to know what to do. 3-day festival comes into Shabbat. It's going to make an Erev Tavshilin. You have to know how to light candles. Yeah, what do you do on Friday? How do you light candles? Yeah, these are questions you have to know, right? Yeah, again, are you going to remember everything? No, you're not going to remember everything. But when you have questions, you need to ask. But now you're on your own. No one's going to be breathing down your throat and, saying, okay, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're making sure of this. No one's going to be doing that. You're going to be on your own. And sometimes people will be less invited, for Shabbos or festivals. Why? Okay, now they're Jewish, so they help them up until this point. Very good. That's, so Kaufman would say, that is when you need the most help. right, is after conversion. Right now, someone once told me that you know, they converted. They were in a small community, and once they converted, people stopped inviting them. Festivals for Shabbos, they felt like they've been dropped like a bad habit, so to speak. So, so I said, didn't you ever listen to any of my classes? I said this could happen. I didn't say it would happen. I said it could happen. It certainly could happen. So I said, either you didn't listen or you didn't take it seriously, right? Okay, yeah, but it can happen, right? It can happen. So the day after, and this is the point, the day after is when the test really starts. Right. And so people say, I don't understand. I've had such a hard time with family, with community. We're dealing with the rabbinical court, dealing with all kinds of things before conversion. They say, well, if this is before conversion and the evil inclination really is much stronger, after conversion, I'm dead. What do you mean you're dead? There are different challenges now. God looks at a person very differently. Yeah. So it comes along the Gemara and says, so why is it on you have it so much harder afterwards? That's the answer. It's one answer. It's not the only answer. One answer is they didn't prepare properly. Yeah, because they didn't prepare properly, they get tossed around. Right? So again, it's a catch-22. And again, I hear this all the time, especially from women, not married or never married, don't have kids, whatever, want to get married. Very good. I hear that. But we're not going to turn over the world necessarily to convert a person unless they think they're ready. And if they're not ready, it's going to come out to burn them. It's going to come out against them. So it's not worthwhile. But, nobody gets that. Nobody understands that. They only complain afterwards and say, why is it so hard? Why is it now so hard? Yeah, much harder than it was before. I mean, it's a scary proposition. But I want people to understand there's a reality here. Right? There is a reality. Now, I understand. The person will say, I want to see if I get married. I want to, try and have kids, blah, blah, blah. Very good. I'm not against that. You got to go through protocol. And protocol means if you're not ready, you're not ready. Right? Or up to that point, your person will tell me, and I've heard this many times, ad nauseum, people say, I'm a Jew at heart. I'm more Jewish than most people. That doesn't mean anything. It absolutely means nothing. Yeah? Yeah? You say, I have a Jewish soul. I feel I have a Jewish soul. Right? Not to offend anyone. I probably already did. Right? But what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. If you haven't gone through the process of conversion, it's nothing. It's nothing. Because you haven't done anything. You have not properly converted. Yeah, it sounds kind of cruel, but that's the reality. Right? That is the reality. So again, it's a major catch-22. People say it shouldn't be this hard and I should have to work this hard and, all these different things, all these different problems. Okay. But at the end of the day after, just remember, however long it took and however hard it was, the day after is going to be a billion times harder. I'm not saying it should take 10 years. I'm not saying it should take 5 years. I got this question, just recently. How long in general should it take? It should take 2 years. Person lives in a community, at least for a year, it should take 2 years. Right? But again, you tell me, I got delayed doing this, delayed doing that. Some people got delayed during COVID. Okay. There are a lot of different things going on behind the scenes. Very good. That's what it should be. Now, the question's going to be, what happens the day after? You can't just sit in a cave. You got to make blessings. You got to pray. There are things you have to do. Now, the saving grace is God knows where a person's holding. Okay. Yeah, that is a saving grace. He knows where you're holding. Right? But you got to be prepared. Yeah, you absolutely have to be prepared. And if a person's not totally prepared and they're weak in certain things, they have to strengthen it. Right? That is no question. Right? It's not an option not to observe Shabbos. That's not an option. Yeah. And, a person works, got to tell their employer, no, can't work on Shabbos. That's it. You want to work Saturday night, you can work on Sunday, whatever it is, you can't work on Shabbos. there are certain jobs people have to work on Shabbos. Yeah, if you're doctors, other things, certain things. That's a different issue, right? But most jobs you can't work on Shabbos, period. Yeah, the way you do about that. The employer says you're going to work on Shabbos. That's it. You can't go in. As a Jew, you can't go in. It's all for real now. Right? It's not all make believe. Right? Got to nip it in the bud. This is what you got to do. This is what they have to be told. That's fitted. That's it. Yeah. All right. Let me just finish up this paragraph here. And then we'll get to these questions here. So we said, reaching a person's potential. So we said someone who's standing and sitting, i.e., with a crown on their head, so to speak. That's talking about what? That's talking about the merit. That's talking about the merit, reaching their potential, right? That's talking about a portion of the world to come. Very good. And what is the rewards in this world? So therefore, says Kuyakar, the reward in this world is what? Is that mishpatim, the laws that I understand, are going to come before laws I don't understand. Yeah, which means that these are things that my mind understands, and they're going to come first. In order to tell you what the reward of doing things that make sense, that a person's going to be walking in front of God, right? That people are going to see the benefit of what they do, right? We're not talking about the spiritual. We're talking about a person going to see a Jew keeping mitzvahs. They're going to see that a Jew's doing the right thing. They're going to see that. They're going to say, oh, thank God his father taught him Torah. Thank God his Rebbe taught him Torah. Very good. Yeah, they're going to see it in this world. They're going to see it in this world. But he says, even those laws that you keep that we don't understand, i.e., can't mix wool and linen, can't eat pig, etc., or the red heifer, right? Of the red heifer. Yeah, even though the reason is not revealed, we don't know what the reasons are. I mean, it doesn't mean we don't have to try and figure them out, but it's not logical. It's for sure not logical. Nonetheless, they got the ability to walk in front of God if they keep them either way. Yeah, it doesn't. In other words, I can understand the reward they get in this world because they make a sanctification of God's name. What's the sanctification of God's name? People see, Jews and non-Jews, they act in accordance, with what they should be doing. Yeah, they don't push a line, they don't cut people off on the road, they speak nicely to people, whatever it is, right? They see it and acknowledge that where does it come from? It comes from the fact they keep Torah mitzvahs. Now, some people will not admit that. Not at all, because, let's say they're a secular Jew. They don't want to admit that because then they're going to say, what about what we do? What about our values? Well, we don't know a lot of their values. Very good. I mean, they could have some good values, some Torah values, right? But they're going, they cannot say openly, wow, it's your kids got such a great education. Wow, they, unbelievable what they learned. You know what they'll say? They'll say you got lucky. That's what they'll say. Yeah. So, okay, no guarantee. Person grow up in the most, religious of families, no guarantee that they're going to turn out the way you want. And they're going to keep Torah mitzvahs, no guarantee. Everyone has, their own challenges. But at the end of the day, we say the Torah is not an inheritance. It's totally not an inheritance. Right? It's because, parents are religious, siblings are religious, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and all that. It's not an inheritance. They got to get it for themselves, right? They have to take it for themselves. Very good. But there are many obstacles along the way. Many, many obstacles along the way. But this is the reason they will never admit it comes from Torah. Because they see it didn't come from secular world. Because we don't have secular values in general. Yeah, where does it come from? Everything comes from the Torah. Right? Honoring parents. Where does it come from? If you have an obligation to honor parents, it comes from the Torah. Right? Secular world. Someone tells me a story. I mean, it's a pretty pathetic story, but the story goes that they're in a mall They're in a shopping mall with they have a toddler, right? Let's say, or a baby in a stroller, either way. And the grandmother, let's say is like in their 80s. So if you're in your 80s, depending on the person, you don't walk so fast. Yeah, you don't normally walk so fast. So his grandchild, like 50 years younger at least, says, Grandma, come on, let's go. You gotta move. Why are you walking so slow? Someone told me the story, and I'm like, they don't think there's anything wrong with it. A grandchild telling, a grandparent who's, much, much older, to tell them, you gotta move, get with the picture, we got things to do, you gotta move. So put them on the hoverboard, put them on a skateboard, put them in something they can move faster. They can't. 36 years old. What do you think? What do you think? They're ready to, run a marathon? Again, some people older in better shape. Some people older not in such good shape. If they're lucky, they can walk. Yeah, but a grandchild. I'm not talking about a child. Child be worse. Child be 10 times worse. Yeah, a grandchild has the chutzpah to say that to a grandparent. Now, if you would call them on it, right? I'm just going to throw this out there, right? They'll take other questions. You're going to call them on it. They're going to think you're off your caught and picking it. They say, I didn't say anything wrong. What did I say wrong? I just want a grandma to move faster. Yeah, and maybe you tell me even the grandmother's not going to say anything. Not that they're afraid to say anything. Yeah, not that they're afraid to say anything. Yeah, but they don't say anything. They say, "Oh, that's that's the way people talk." Yeah, come on, get with the picture, move. Like, you're horrified. Horrified. Imagine if a child said that. Come on, Dad, get moving. I don't care if you're 100. I don't care if you just had a hip replacement. Come on. Like, we need to get somewhere. You gotta move. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Most people, you tell them this, they'll think you dropped off from a different planet. They'll think you're an apps that they'll think you're absolutely out of your cotton picking it. Yeah. But if a child said it, you slapped them. They would deserve to be slapped. That's absolute chutzpah to say. A grandchild to say it? A grandchild to say it? It's rude. It's rude. No other way to say it. And now what's the reason? What's the reason? First of all, even if we're going to say that the closer you get to Mount Sinai, right, the greater respect the person should have for that person, right? Because generations get weaker, not stronger. But even with all that, what will we say? It's an obligation on a parent's grandparents. Talk to them a certain way. Can't contradict them in general. Yeah? I'm not saying they're evil. It's a totally different thing. Right? Still can't embarrass them in public, even if they are evil. Yeah, I mean, you have to stand up for them when they walk in a room and other things. Okay. Right? Honor them, you probably don't have to. But, there are certain laws here. Now, someone who grows up religious, or even if they don't, they find out later, they become religious later, right? What's one mitzvah that's very much instilled? Very much instilled. Certainly when kids are younger, etc., it's honoring parents. Again, we're not looking for slaves. Parents deserve honor. They deserve honor. They brought you into this world. Whatever you can do to help them. You serve, you help, you do other things. Especially if they're older. Again, I'm not talking about people who are evil. It's a different issue. Yeah. But if you're, a secular person and you grew up, you went to public school and this and that, you're not getting that value. You're for sure not getting that value. That's reinforced. I can't even tell you. It's reinforced a lot. Right? In Jewish schools from the very beginning, it's reinforced a lot. Reinforced on, again, doesn't give the parents right to abuse them and other things. But have to have respect. Have to show them honor. At the very least, they brought them into this world. I'm not talking about physical abuse, psychological abuse. I'm not even talking about any of that. Yeah, for that reason alone, they deserve to be honored. They deserve to be respected. Yeah, for a grandchild to say such a thing, it's horrific. Right, I'll just tell one story of Yaakov Kamenetsky, bless the memory, was when Torah Giants, the last generation. He was on a plane going somewhere, and he had a couple of his grandkids there, and like every 5 minutes they come up and they say, "Yeah, Grandpa's 80. Can I get you this? Can I get you that? Can I get you the other thing?" And this guy's sitting next to him, and he says, "Like, how do you get your grandchildren you know, to serve you like that? Like, yeah, I hear from my grandkids, when they need money or birthdays or whatever. How do I ever hear from them?" So he said, "I'll tell you a fundamental principle." He said, "The difference is the older generation, we're a link in a chain that goes back to Mount Sinai. Yeah, we're a link in a chain, right? So, future generations or later generations, are, something lost in that generation. It's a weaker generation compared to previous generations. So showing respect to that, to that link in the chain. He said, the difference is your grandkids look at you as like a monkey, right? Fueled by evolution. So they treat you like a monkey, right? That's the difference, right? That's the difference. But again, a secular parent, a secular Jew will never say, how, let's say, grandkids call them all the time, see how they're doing, different things. They'll never equate it to the education they got. They'll never equate it to that. Yeah, they can't. Why? Because if they say, "Wow, you got such a great education," they're gonna make the deduction. It's not, we're not talking on Newtonian physics over here, right? They're gonna make a very simple deduction. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't raise my kids like that. Yeah, I didn't raise my kids like that. So they're not going to make that. They won't make that connection. They can't make that connection. What they can say at best is they could tell you, well, your kids are this, your kids are that, unbelievable. You got lucky. We don't believe in luck, right? But again, you know, is there a, um, is there a guarantee? A person, a person's kids will turn out the way they should, even if they got the greatest, Torah education. No, not a guarantee. We said before, the Torah is not an inheritance. At the very least, with the education they got, even if they go off, they know. They know what the right way is. They know what the right way is. But, to have I'm just reading something now about chutzpah, one of the worst, one of the worst character traits, really actually, what's it called, being gaivadik, having, being conceited. It's the base of all bad character traits. There was a question, if a child is chutzpahdik, or a student is chutzpahdik, what do you do? Do you look the other way? Or you have to discipline them and nip it in the bud? So it depends, right? It depends. It depends why they're doing it, why they're saying it. Doesn't mean they have to get punished straight away. Doesn't necessarily mean that. On the other hand, you can't let it slide, right? So you have to find a certain mix. So some experts were saying, again, in this case, it depends, right? They're saying that, let's say his teachers, they were saying, one was saying that, there were times, kids said something really out of line. Could have taken them out and really really demolished them, right? But there are other things going on. I didn't. I looked the other way. Other things, I would. So, you have to see it. You have to call it kind of the way you see it, right? But it's A, it should never happen. B, a person can't punish out of anger. You can't just nail them straight away. On the other hand, you can't let it go by either, right? So it's kind of a catch-22, right? In a certain way. Nonetheless, you got to be careful because the more it happens, and the more a person says it, they're not going to think there's anything wrong with it, right? So you have parents today that don't want to rock the boat too much. They don't want to lose their kids. On the other hand, kids need discipline, right? But some things you can't let go. Yeah, regardless of what the kid's going to say or whatever. But you got to be calm, right? You got to be calm. There was a Baruch Bear, said by a Baruch Bear, bless the memory, he was the head of the yeshiva in Kamenetz. And he said whenever he had to discipline a child, he put on, he'd have to walk to his closet and get his hat and put on his hat. Yeah. So he had his punishment hat, so to speak. Now he said, why did he do that? Right? Because by the time, he had to go to his closet, he had to put on his hat. It gave him a little bit of a chance to calm down before he had to punish. Right? So there's times where he had to punish. Yeah, but so it took him, like I say, it took him 20 minutes or whatever. It took him a few minutes. He had to get up, he had to go to the closet, he had to put on his hat, right? You know, he took a little bit of time to think, okay, what's he going to say? How's he going to say it? How's he not going to do it out of anger? And all that. So he took a little bit of time to do that in order that he wouldn't fly off the handle. That's how he tried to control his anger. That's a big thing. What's the first thing you're going to do? React. That's the first thing. And then, you'll scream, they'll scream. And it's a hard thing, especially, if we're tired and depends what they did and all these, there are a lot of different factors here. But it's a very interesting idea. What did he do? He waited, not a significant amount of time, but he waited enough time. Yeah, by the time, it's only a few minutes, not even. Right? It wasn't like he was an invalid. He got up, he had to get his hat, put on his hat, so to speak, and then speak to his kid. So that took a few minutes. Within those few minutes, he gathered his thoughts. What's he going to do? Right? Because you can't punish out of anger. Punishing out of anger is bad. Right? Because if you punish out of anger, a lot of times, it's not an easy thing to do, but a lot of times what's going to happen is the punishment, you just fly off the handle, the punishment will not fit the crime, and the kid will not get the message. Kid absolutely will not get the message. Right? So it's a hard thing, though. Because, you want to discipline, you want to put them in their place because of what they did, and this and that, but you got to be careful also. Can't come down so harsh, kind of regardless of what they've done. On the other hand, you can't let it go by either. So you have to find, some, some middle ground because there are parents that do not want to necessarily discipline. They're afraid of their kids. They're afraid the kid will say, you know what, you're going to punish me. You're going to tell me this, and I'm not going to keep Torah mitzvahs. Okay, that's their choice. Everyone makes the choice, but at the end of the day, they make that choice. That's their choice. Well, because you wouldn't let them go outside and go to a friend's house when it was late, or this and that. They're going to make such a statement. They'll come back. They'll see the error of their ways at some point. Yeah, right. But again, everything with a reason. And sometimes we can be the best disciplinarians and this and that. And, at a certain point, a friend of mine was telling me, I saw her at a engagement, somebody. He says, at a certain point, kids don't listen. Even the religious one. They don't listen. But you have to try and educate them. Still have to, discipline them to a point. Right? But, once they get older, you can't really hold anything over them. It's very hard. It's very, very hard. But his friend of mine said, straight away. He said, well, because I asked him about something about, I don't know, talking about where his, one of his kids wanted to move and, whatever. And he's like, listen, you can't talk to them. It's the kids you can't talk to. At a certain age. They got their minds made up. They're not asking you for advice. They want to do what they want to do. That is part of the reality. Right? I'm not going to say no. That probably is part of the reality. But doesn't mean you don't have to educate them. Or try and educate them. When they're married, it's even harder because, you want to keep the peace. But at the same time, sometimes you just have to watch things. And unless, things spiral out of control, then you get involved. But, once they're married, told all my son-in-law, you walk down the aisle. My daughter walks down the aisle under the canopy. That's it. She's yours. 100%. Then I'm not getting involved. So if I have to get involved, I will. But I'm not getting involved. Right? It's one thing. You have to have hands off. Yeah. I mean, again, if it's a dangerous situation, you get involved. But, someone said, you said that? I said, absolutely. I said, I'm here to help whatever I can do. Yeah, whatever I can do. But I'm not getting involved. And that ruins, marriage. It doesn't help. Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong doesn't help. Rabbi might have blessed him, told me that he would never, ever go to his kid's house, never walk in unexpected. Never walk in unexpected. You'd always call ahead of time and say, do you mind if I come over or whatever. Never came unexpected. Now, kids come unexpected all the time. That, okay. Yeah. I don't have an issue with that. They want to come, whatever. I've 3 kids living in my neighborhood right now, 2 of them walking distance. I can have some of them or all of them in one shot, during the day. Walk in, come over, this, that. I got, okay. Sometimes a friend of mine once said, he told one of his kids, like, no, like, I need some quiet, whatever. Okay. But, it's good. They want to come, and their grandkids want to come and, whatever. But, you can't get loud and noisy and, all kinds of other things. Okay. But at the end of the day, you want to make, you want to make your own where they can go. Someone said, wow, you just never know who's going to come on a daily basis. I'm like, right. I said, we never know. You know what? And that's the best thing. Let them come. Let them come. Okay, you got things to do. Fine. But like, you're going to shut your doors and say, no, you can't come. Okay, maybe if I was, much older and sound bothered me and other things bother me, bother a person. Okay. You can't have too many people at once. I get it. Right? But, if you're younger and they want to come, why should you stop them? Why in the world would you stop them? Yeah. You're going to say, but they can come anytime and they can even stay for dinner. So what? So you make them dinner. So you make noodles, you make something simple, whatever. They have a good time. Like, what's the problem? What's the problem? Now, some people are much older, they don't want it. They don't want it. They don't want the noise, they don't want the mess. Okay. I can understand. To a point. Well, look, they can just show up at any time. You're right. They could. So what? It's a beautiful thing if they want to come. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, sometimes you can't spend as much time, whatever. Fine. But they want to come. You stop them? You say, no, it's inconvenient. I don't want to see them. Okay, it depends, it depends on the person's mood or whatever. But in general, we have an open door policy. They want to come. They show up sometimes. Had a lot of people here at once. Okay. Yeah, it can get loud. Sure. And kids can fight and this and that. Okay. But they're going to leave. I was just telling someone at a wedding, if we would have known how great grandkids are, I would have had them first. So people's like, do you ever learn biology? I'm like, no. Right. But, they come, they leave. Very good. Right. But you want them to come. You want them to feel comfortable. Yeah. Okay. You got the mess, the noise. I get it. 100%. But it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, but like, someone can say, they can say this and mess up your own. Okay, so we'll clean it. Or they'll help clean up or whatever. Not worth it? Of course it's worth it. Of course it's worth it because you want to come back. All right, let me take some there are a bunch of questions here. Let me deal with them 1 second here. Someone asked when we put straw, okay, on Shabbos. Yeah, and for sure we're going to make a ridge on the ground. Straw is different. Straw is not the same as if I took a bench. If I took a bench and I drag it across a dirt path, 100% of the time, segregation means that every single time I do it, it's going to make a groove. That's forbidden. A stroller does not do that. A stroller, all the stroller does is the wheels push it down, right? But that's not making a groove. Right? You do it, let's say, for example, you do it in sand. Sand will never make a groove. And in mud, you'll never make a groove. It's not really, if you do it with a bench, that'll for sure make a groove. That's not a segregation. Right? That's a segregation. Yeah, if it did it all the time. In this case, we'll never do it. And even if it did do it, let's say it would do it. It made a groove on Shabbos. Okay. Even if it would, it's stuff Shem Miskaven, and something I didn't have intention for anyway. But if it would make a groove 100% of the time, if I took a stroller, right, like my park bench, and I went over sand, and I went on a dirt path 100% of the time, it made a groove, that would be forbidden. That would be a segregation. In other words, every single time I do it, makes it forbidden. Very good. But this is not the case. Right? This is not even close to that. So therefore, even if it did do that, it would be a davar she'eino miskaven. It'd be something I didn't have intention to do. Since it's something I didn't have intention to do, it would be okay. It would be permissible. That wouldn't be That would not be an issue. Um, but, some people say they do it as a joke. Okay, want grandma to move faster. Okay, again, let's make very clear. Let's say this grandchild was doing it, yeah, kind of as a joke. Let's say, yeah, still rude. There's still an element there, you know, that's rude, even if they are, even if somewhat they are joking. In this case, they weren't really joking though. But even if you want to say they are joking, you know what they say? It's a little bit of truth to every joke, right? A little bit of truth. So really, they want them to move faster. That's what they're saying. Even somewhat in a joking manner, but that can be rude, right? So if they're doing it not in a joking manner, for sure it's rude. That's nothing to talk about. Right? That there's nothing to talk about. But you want to say if it's done in a joking manner and the person understands in a joking manner, okay. So again, I wouldn't, yeah. It could be considered rude also. Yeah, it could be considered rude. Even if they are joking. That's you have someone, let's say, in a walker. They're in a walker. Yeah, I think, come on, can't you move any faster? As a joke. I don't know if they're gonna think that, standing up, no pun intended. I don't think they're gonna think it's so funny. Yeah. Could be totally rude by saying that. Now, if they laugh as well, so maybe get around the problem because they also laughed. And they say, yeah, I'm trying whatever. Like, if there's no tinge of anger on the other person, okay, then they laugh also. Okay. But it's still somewhat rude. It is still somewhat rude, to say. So someone makes a comment and says, you gotta take your kids to a park, let's say, nearby a park. So what do the grandparents do? They don't want to walk, so they drive behind them. Okay. Doesn't mean they can't walk. They don't want to walk. Okay. Right? So the kid says, like, stop the car and get out and walk. Like, you want to be with us, be with us. Don't be in the, don't be in the car, behind us. Okay, I hear that. Say it. You have a little bit of tact also, I would think. But um, yeah, people could joke about it. If the person takes it in stride as a joke, okay. Yeah, I still think it's somewhat rude to say. But see, that's the whole point. That's why it's on us, right? That's considered scoffing or mocking, right? Not for idolatry or anything else. That's like funness. It's making fun. That's what it is. But say, no, come on. Like they know you're kidding, right? They're not taking you seriously, but it's annoying, right? That's exactly what late sunness is. Yeah. But I don't think this person was joking either. Right? That's why it's ruder. That's why it's much more, it's much more rude than or ruder, let's say better. That it's much ruder when they mean it. When they don't, again, if they don't mean it, if they don't mean it and they even take it as a joke, so you probably didn't transgress, right? I find it hard to believe that an older person may joke about it. They may joke about it. But I think like somewhere, deep down, they're made to realize they're old. And older people make older people jokes and whatever. Used to be able to do this, do that. Okay. Someone, someone someone blows out a birthday cake. They have dentures. Yeah, the dentures come out. Okay, everyone's gonna laugh. Even that person's gonna laugh. Okay, that's a different thing. That's a different thing. This is borderline. This is borderline, even if they're joking, because it could be the person might get offended, but they won't say anything. They won't say anything. Yeah, listen, if they say if 100% doesn't bother them and whatever, good. So they didn't transgress, but you got to be careful. It's late Sundays. It's late Sundays in general. Um, um, person get embarrassed. You're right. Person, even if they don't say anything, they could get embarrassed. You know, imagine the person said it loud so other people could hear. How's that person going to feel? Even if they're joking. They don't put it on a megaphone, but they're like, come on, grandma. Come on, grandma, let's go. What are you walking so slow? We got things to do. Imagine. There are other people around. And I don't think that person's going to feel so good, even though they're walking slow. Even if they say, well, I can't walk any faster, whatever. Like, yeah, even if they laugh about it, I don't think they're inside they're laughing. Yeah. If nobody heard it, again, borderline. I would say it's borderline. I still think it's rude. I definitely still think it's rude at some level. Um, 1 second. All right, let me see other questions here. Does maintaining a joy-filled stature a requirement? Ooh, good question. As in maintaining one willfully while enduring all the lessons of learning. Yeah. Um, I would tell you like this. Not everything. Um, 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 I would say not everything, not everything a person learns. They're gonna say, wow, it's so inspiring, so unbelievable. They want to get up and sing and dance. They're like, so glad I want to be a Jew and this and that. Not everything's gonna be like, so inspiring. There are things I would think are more inspiring. There are things that I think may be less inspiring, but either case, you still have to know it, right? One way or another. So, or a person says, yeah, I already knew this. I'm not really learning anything new. There weren't any nuances. Okay. Yeah. It's, yeah, I'll give an example. I'll give an example. I heard a great rabbi once say that, when a person prays every day, guys got an obligation to pray 3 times a day. When they pray 3 times a day, are they like in the clouds? They feel like they're walking on air, walking on water. Yeah, a person gets up in the morning, they have to sleep, maybe they wake up by the end. Okay. But they feel like, oh, I'm going to serve, going to serve my creator. It's going to be the beginning of a great day, and they're singing God's praises and they're into things and whatever. Okay, my Hasidic side here coming out, right? Let's say, is every prayer service going to be like that? I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, if it is, great. Prayer is something that always needs to be strengthened, right? So prayer is probably not a good example, but we use it as an example anyway. Yeah, not every single thing a person does, they're gonna be so inspired. Yeah, some things will be more inspired, some things less inspired, and some things, they go through the motions. Now, sometimes they catch themselves, sometimes they get more inspired. But can a person expect everything that they do to lead them on such a high on a daily basis? Depends where the person's holding. Depends what they're going through. It's hard to serve God when you're being, thrown around like a rag doll and all this, as we always say. Nonetheless, I would say that this great rabbi said, you know what? We're all work in progress. Nobody should expect, this is the way the evil inclination. The evil inclination come along and say, oh, you think you prayed well today? You just said the words. Your mind was elsewhere. You were thinking about who knows what. Yeah. We have good days, we have bad days. We have better days, we have worse days. Okay. Nonetheless, doesn't mean you don't have to try, doesn't mean you don't have to work hard. That's not what it means. Right? You have to work hard. But for a person to think every prayer service is going to be walking on air when you're saying the same words over and over again, except on, festivals and Shabbos, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yeah, and prayer has to be worked on, right? You can't come into prayer just like, came off the street, you go straight into prayer. You'll take a few minutes, whatever. It's a hard thing, right? It's a very hard thing. So, this is the way, this is the way to live inspired. You have to work at it, right? You have to prepare yourself. And it's hard to be inspired again, when life is very hard. So again, sometimes you'll have an easier time. Sometimes you'll have a harder time. Sometimes you just fall in the mud and you say, okay, tomorrow's another day. I failed at this. I failed at that. I'm trying to work on this. You pray to God to help you, this and that. Okay. a person, could, not sleep as much, so they're not paying attention as much. A lot of things, we may do by rote, which is akin to spiritual death. Okay, you got to work at that, right? We are a work in, work in progress. Is every aspect, of Judaism going to be like, a person is, so inspired? Think about cleaning for Passover, right? And by the 15th of Nisan, no matter what, you got to be done. It means you got to clean your car. It means any place that has clubmates. There are people like spring clean. They like to clean in general. Okay, very good. There are people hate doing that. They don't have money to pay someone else to do it. You can't pay someone else to do it, so you have to do it, right? Now, does that mean someone's whistling Dixie? No. That mean they enjoy it? No. Can they be listening? Can they be blasting music while they're doing it? Trying to have a better time, listening to a class? Yeah. Yeah. But is every last thing we're gonna do gonna be like so unbelievable and unbelievably, enjoyable that every second of every day that we're just, we're singing God's praise, we're happy for everything? There are some people like that, right? That are not Hasidic. There are people like that. That they're just like, today's a new day to pray, today's a new day to learn, today's, a new day to honor my parents, a new day for this, a new day for that. Very good. But sometimes you get clocked upside the head, things we don't expect, or even if we do expect. It's hard, right? Right? It's very hard. We say every day, by the way, right? We say every day in the morning, Yidu es Hashem b'simcha. You got to serve God with great joy. It's an obligation, serve God with great joy. Is it easy? Depends on the person, right? Most people say it's not so easy. Yeah. And they have to inspire themselves to get inspiration elsewhere. Why? Because they get clocked over the head. They get clocked over the head. Right? Imagine you're doing, you're doing the mitzvah, whatever the mitzvah is, and someone just like throws you under the bus. You're trying to help people, you get thrown under the bus. It happens, right? It certainly can happen. So you can say, but I'm doing this mitzvah, and you're trying to enjoy this mitzvah, and you get slammed. Yeah. Person, let's say, hadn't seen a relative in a long time. So whatever, they go visit. Didn't necessarily have, bad interaction with them. Let's say. They go see them, it's a disaster. But they're there to see them. I don't think they're there to help to do it. They're here because they want to see them. And then what happens? They get clocked on the head. They get clocked on the head. So what happened to the mitzvah? You got the mitzvah. 100%. But guess what? With Sar Agra, according to the amount of pain, that's the amount of reward you get for doing it. Person doesn't feel like getting up. I had one of those days last week. I pushed myself out of bed. Didn't want to get up. Sorry, I didn't want to get up. I'm not gonna say how much sleep I got, but it doesn't matter. The harder it is, the more reward you get. But again, at that point, whatever it is, does that mean, does that mean you're ecstatic to be alive? No. Does that mean, you're taking bodily functions for granted? Probably. But I see this all the time. I get reminded all the time. That's why I bring it up. Reminded all the time that what? You see people, I know some of them became blind, later in life. Basically, it's not even night blindness. I mean, they can't even really see during the day. Right? But it happened over time. I see that. I see people that, I don't know if they were blind, from the very beginning. Whatever. I see people that are mentally challenged. I see all kinds of things. Just like, going on, different buses, seeing different things. So I'm constantly reminded, don't think what you're going through is hard. It is hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard. When you see what other people have, you're going to say, I'm very glad I have what I have. And it's an easy thing to see. It's not an easy thing to process. Because you're going to say, that doesn't help me. Seeing someone blind doesn't make me feel any better. Okay. I understand because the person's getting beaten down in life. Okay. That makes sense. But I would say that, if you internalize the message and you see what these people go through and what other people go through that you don't have, you should be very thankful. You should be extremely thankful. And I'm constantly reminded of that. I see it all the time. But the question is, do you get the message? Is he someone severely mentally challenged? Severely mentally challenged. You don't have that. You should be kissing the ground. You don't have that. Yeah, but I got this and I got that and I got the other thing. Okay. No one says you get in this world scot-free. You don't get off scot-free. Okay. What would you rather have? Would you rather have that? No, I'd rather my life be easier. Okay, but it's not. But you look at these things, you have to internalize the message. Right? I'm not going to say, not going to, open my mouth and say, oh, could it be worse? Oh, it could be worse. It could always be worse. We never open our mouths and say that. Yeah, because it could be worse. But when you see what other people have, you're very glad you have what you have. You don't want what other people have. Yeah, you never want it. I mean, I give thousands of examples. This is, one example. One example we mentioned many times before. The Vilna Gaon students, more than 350 years ago, they were starving, abject poverty. So the Vilna Gaon on Friday sent them to the hospital to go visit people. So they came out of the hospital and saw people couldn't take care of the needs, and all that. They came into Shabbos totally different. Now, when they had soup Friday night, what they have in the soup? Not very much. Maybe a piece of celery, maybe a potato skin. I don't know. They didn't have very much. But when they looked at what other people didn't have and what they couldn't do, their situation paled in comparison. Now, that doesn't mean they still weren't living in abject poverty, right? That didn't change it. What did it change? It changed their outlook, right? Change their outlook on how they're seeing things. Yeah, and that's a huge thing, right? That is, that's a huge thing. Someone there says, that's what a popular rabbi say, Hashem lied once, a white lie. All right, it says, God's character trait is true. Very hard to say God lied. Okay. I wrote that Hashem's not a man, and how would he lie, right? Were you wrong for even saying anything? No. You can call someone out on it, especially if it's heresy, right? And there are times, absolutely, you have to call them out for heresy. At the same time, you'll tell me, well, what if it doesn't do anything? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's not desecration of God's name. You got to warn other people that, a person, I heard somebody say, modern Orthodox rabbi, say that, Abraham and God both failed the Akedah, failed the binding of Isaac. They both failed. That's heresy. That is absolute heresy. Yeah, someone to say that. God failed? Where did he fail? God made him sacrifice his son, or potentially sacrifice his son, in order to bring out any, some dormant character trait from Abraham, right? As the Ramban says over there, he never would have reached his potential had he not done it. So I would have said, so give him credit. God knows the thoughts of man. Give him credit so he didn't have to go through it. He was 9 for 9. He passed 9 very difficult tests. Very, very difficult tests. So I would have said give him credit. So says the Ramban, he would have had the same legacy. He had a huge legacy at this point. Huge legacy. Says the Ramban, his legacy would not have been what it was, would not have been solidified, that's the word, would not have been solidified had he not gone through this test. Made a mistake? That's heresy, right? It's a good thing to call it out, right? It should be called out. Now, should every heretical thing be called out every second? I wouldn't go that far, right? But there are things that have to be said. There are definitely things that have to be said. And that's one of them. That's one of them. Our Rebbe calls out, the Zionists all the time. He calls out people go against Torah all the time. He calls them out. Right? Makes a point. He makes very strong points. Right? One of his points is you don't make compromises. Compromises are forbidden. Yeah, it's one way or the other way. That's it. And if you're going to stand up and you're going to say, I represent Torah, and this is the wishy-washy way of looking at things, you make the entire Torah look bad, right? So you got to call that out. That's bad. That's striving at mediocrity at best. So you got to call that out, right? You can't compromise. You see what happens when you compromise. When you compromise, you lose. You basically lose in many ways. Yeah, there are certain things you may have to do. Okay, He may not have a choice in the worst case scenario. I've been in many of them. Yeah, worst case scenario. Okay, so certain things you may have to do. You may have to compromise, and for the sake of family peace, it's worth it to do. In some cases, not all cases. Okay. But in general, to compromise for the sake of compromising, because you want to compromise the Torah for other gains, no, that you don't do. That you call up. That for sure you got to call out. But you got to. This is something. Yeah, this is something you got to call out. God's not a human, and God doesn't make mistakes. It's heresy. It's pure heresy. That is pure heresy. Yeah. Someone asked, "Isn't the Akedah proof that when we set ourselves to do a mitzvah and are prevented, we get the mitzvah despite not being able to complete it?" Part of it. The point of the Akedah though is God told him to do something that went against total logic. Total logic. He kept being reminded that his offspring, his progeny, is going to be Isaac. It's going to be Yitzchak. Not going to be Ishmael. Right? In other words, all the Torah that Abraham knows, and he understood the Torah before it was given, and what he had to do, and what the commandments were, and all that. Okay. And he gave all that to Yitzchak. Very good. Yitzchak is going to be the spiritual heir. Okay. How can God tell him to now sacrifice it? I mean, that's what the language is. It's very clear. Right? To bring him up means to sacrifice. But even in the end, since, as brought down, he wanted to make a wound, something, let him, not be a waste for anything, doing it. So that's why God brought the ram and sacrificed the ram. And so let me make a blemish, something, no. Right? But the point of the binding of Isaac is that it went totally against the logic. Right? And what did he do after God told him this? He said, okay, let's go. Right? Gathers everyone together, get up very early in the morning, and he's going to do the mitzvah of great joy. Doesn't make sense. It's not logical. Goes against everything he knows. That's the test. And every step along the way, he gets reward for not even asking a question. Now, people say, oh, he did it blindly, this and that. Yeah, what did he do? What did he do? He took his Yetzer Hara, he took his evil inclination and crushed it, destroyed it. And he wasn't going to allow the evil inclination to get into his head. So the amount of reward, every step along the way, got unbelievable reward. Didn't question. Now you say, well, if God came to us, we wouldn't question either. This is a big question. This is a big question. It goes against everything he knows. Every last thing that God has told him up until this point is a total contradiction. Because an obvious question, if you're going to tell me Isaac's is going to inherit me, and he's going to inherit Torah and pass it on the next generation, blah, 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 very good. How can he kill him? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you want me to kill him? He could have asked that. He sure could have asked that. But the commentaries say that was the greatest part of his reward. The greatest part is it in question. Now, others would say, not right, but others would say he should have questioned. How could he go in blind like that? How could he take a divine decree like that? And why is God giving him such a divine decree in the first place? I.e., as if to say, God forbid, they both made mistakes. God was wrong, God forbid, for giving him this test. And Avram was wrong for following blindly. And maybe you could say, God forbid, Yitzchak was wrong. He's 37 years old. You don't think he could have stopped his father? Could have stopped his father. His father, is over 100. But he says, tie me down, make sure I'm a pure sacrifice. Right? That's heresy, though. To say they all failed. Right? It was a test. Very good. God gave him a direct command. He helped squeeze out a certain level of potential that Abraham at this point did not have. And wanted to solidify his legacy. Very good. Yeah, but it went against everything he knew, and he still didn't complain. Right? He still didn't complain. Yeah, that's really what the Kate is about. Um, but at the very end, now some say, according to Zohar, that he actually killed him. That he actually took the knife and killed him, and then brought him back to life. Then he was brought back to life. Yeah, simple explanation, obviously not that way, right? Not that way, but yeah, he was given the opportunity to do something, and yeah, you could say that's part of the reason. That's part of the reason he got a chance to fulfill it. So therefore, he wanted to make some sort of mark, something. God says no. It's a perfect sacrifice, whatever. But again, you got to ask the question: why was God doing it? What's the point, right? Is the point that even if I tell Abraham something totally illogical, he's still going to follow me, right? Right? That's what the evil inclination wants. The evil inclination says, test him. He made this great meal, whatever. He didn't thank you. He didn't thank you enough, right? And what does God say? Even if I would tell him to sacrifice his only son, he'd do it. So yeah, do it. Comes on, the evil inclination says, do it. And he tests him. Now. Does he have to do everything according to what the Satan says or whatever? No. You're going to take the Satan and go and bink. They don't have to listen to him. Well, why did he? Because he said, because he held it's probably going to be an unbelievable sanctification of my name. He's going to do something that's totally illogical. Yeah. I'm not going to make him do it, but it's totally illogical. And he's going to pass the test and his legacy will be solidified. That's what happened. Right? But the evil inclination wanted him tested to see if he's going to blaspheme or other things, against God. And he failed. Right? So it is brought down. I already brought this down last week that when a person overcomes the evil inclination, doesn't give in, evil inclination is very happy. Extremely happy. Yeah. So, in that case, he did everything he could to stop him. He was happy. Right? He was totally happy. Right? That he didn't do it. Yeah, let me see other questions here. 1 second. Why didn't question like Moshe did so many times? Seeming it's on a higher level, at some level, right? That's why, by the way, I think in Parshas Bo in Book of Exodus says that God says this is a name of God I'm using that I only use with your forefathers. Why do you use a certain name of God only for his forefathers? Because he said they didn't ask me any questions. They didn't complain like you did. Yeah, seemingly they were on a different level. They didn't get the Torah. Torah wasn't given to them. Right on Mount Sinai, different reasons. There were reasons why Moses had to be the one to do it. But he seemingly gets chastised. They said, I'm using a name here that I didn't use before. Because the other names I used before because they never questioned me. They never questioned me. Now, is that good or bad? Some people will say it's good because they have perfect faith. No matter what God said they're going to do. Others would say wrongly, but they would say, it's bad because they're going on blind faith. Yeah, they should question. They absolutely should question. Yeah, they didn't. But you see Moses complained. You see the people of that generation complain. Right? I mean, that's, you look at the book of Numbers, very hard book to go through. Face value. Complain about the fish, complain about, they want meat, complain about the watermelon, back in Auschwitz. They complain about all these things. You got the spies complain, Korach complain. I mean, you have a whole generation of complainers, bunch of whiners. Yeah, we miss this, we miss that. Yeah, there's a lot of things that were lacking. They were missing, even though that's the greatest generation in the history of man. It's very hard to understand. Right? It's very, very hard to understand. But God makes the point. God makes the point and says, I'm going to use this name I didn't use with them because they're on a higher level. They didn't complain. They didn't ask me questions, per se. Yeah, so then you ask, why wasn't the Torah given through them? Good question. Because there were different things that Moses had that they didn't have. Okay. But they didn't question him. Yeah. Now, is questioning a bad thing? That's, you say, don't we, don't we love questions in Judaism? We love questions. God don't want to be questioned. There was, after the war, there was, I don't know if it was just rabbis were there. A lot of people, discussing why the Holocaust potentially happened, why it happened. Some said because of assimilation, some said they didn't protest, some say other things. Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, blessed memory, was head of the Beis Din in London, and then came, the end of his life, came to the land of Israel, banged on the table. He banged on the table and basically said, it is what it is. Yeah, we don't know, right? We don't know, and you can't ask the question, right? So you don't ask the questions, right? And it makes sense. You're not going to understand the answer anyway, right? But you don't ask the question. God made the decree. Could add 1,000 different reasons why. So we don't make contingencies here. Yeah, God made the decree. That's it. Well, it's a very harsh decree. Yeah, it's a very sad decree, but he made the decree. It's not for us to understand. That's it. They say, oh, that simple faith is it. Doesn't matter. Call whatever you want. Yeah. We don't understand God's ways. We say in the Haftorah of every fast day. We say, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. That's it. And anyone who thinks they understand, they don't understand. We're too small to understand. Even Moshe Rabbeinu himself, 48th level of understanding. Moshe Rabbeinu asked God, I want to see your face. I want to understand why we go through what we're going through and all that. And what does God tell him? You can't see, no one can see my face and live. You're never going to understand. This question always comes up, but I want to know what I'm going through, the measure for measure. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know, and he'll never know, and no one will ever know, so there's no point. There's no point. Some people say, but I want to know. Again, my opinion for what it's worth. I'm not convinced. Even if God will open your eyes for a split second and tell you, I'm not so convinced, my own personal opinion. I don't think people will be ecstatic, say, oh, that's the reason? Thank you very much. I'm happy now. Now I understand. It's going to be something you did a month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever it is, and now you're paying the price for it. Okay. You're never going to know. You have to look into your actions. You certainly have to look into your actions. Okay. But many people say, I want to know. And I want to understand. Okay. Yeah, we don't like to understand, but I'm not convinced if we did understand, it would be good for us. Yeah, that a person would be very happy. Other people may disagree. Other people may say, yeah, I'm very happy. I know what I know. I'm very happy was pointed out to me. Okay. Yeah, I'm not convinced that's the case. But, at the end of the day, I understand people want to know, people want to understand. But Moshe Rabbeinu didn't. Right? And he came to almost the last level of understanding. He had one level of understanding he didn't have in this one. Right? Came to the 48th level of understanding. Right? So simply I would say, if God's not going to tell him, and he doesn't know, then no one's going to know. And there's no point to know. You have to work on your actions, that's true. We have to work hard, okay. You're not going to know. But it is true. Moshe Rabbeinu and others asked a lot of questions that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't. They also could have asked many questions. But what Yaakov goes through. So he's partial talking about Yosef. Yeah, I had a problem with Esav, problem with Lavan. He's got a whole thing with Dinah. Whatever. Got a whole bunch of problems he's got to deal with. He doesn't complain. Rachel tells him, give me children. He's like, what do you think, I'm God? I just give children. He snapped at her. Yeah. Because anyone doesn't have kids, it's like consider like they're dead. Okay. Should be a little more sensitive. Okay. Hard to understand. It doesn't complain. I'll make one complaint. I don't think Yitzhak makes any complaints. Avram, with all the 10 trials he goes through, doesn't make any complaints. I don't think he makes any complaints. Everyone else makes complaints. You could say, weaker generation, this, okay. Right? They're flawed to a certain extent. Even though we understand that all 12 sons are all righteous. Yeah, they are all righteous. Okay. But, you look at the, generations after that, especially the generation that saw God face to face on Mount Sinai, and all that. What happens? They complain. The previous generations didn't. So it could be their immune was stronger. Very well could be. But, it's a good question. It's a good question. There are a lot of things. I'll give one example. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't want to go save the Jewish people. Yeah, he says, I'm speak well, I have a lisp, and they're not going to listen to me, and God does a stick trick and some other things. Why does he want to go? God gave him a direct command. Yeah, do you think God wasn't going to protect him? No, that wasn't the issue. According to nature, it wasn't possible for the Jewish people to get out. Because he looked up to heaven, he saw the stars. He said it's not possible to go, to get out. So God says, you're right. According to nature, they can't get out. But you know what? I can change nature. I'm above nature. Yeah. So if you look at the dialogue, the beginning of the book of Exodus, doesn't make sense. Logically, it doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? Why is it complaining? God says, you have Aaron, your brother, he'll speak. I'll take care of this, I'll take care of that. What's he asking? What in the world is he asking? Why does he want to go? Because he understands. The underdog in this case never wins. Right? Sometimes in sports, the underdog wins when you least expect it. Okay. They're going to roll this, that, whatever. Okay. In this case, it's 100% chance they're going to lose. You put it in 10 supercomputers, they lose. They always lose. They're never coming out of Egypt according to nature. So when you see the dialogue, one reason, I'm not saying it's the reason, but it's one reason, Moses himself doesn't want to go, and it looks kind of dodgy, as the English would say. Right? It looks kind of fishy. Why? What's his argument? God's telling him, go there, I'll protect you, I'll take care of you. You're going to bring the Jewish people out. He's on speak well, and this, and they're not going to believe me. Right? All these different claims. Right? If I'm playing God, put on my funny George Burns glasses, put on my mustache, what would I have said? So what would Kaufman have said? I was like, do you have any ears? Did you hear what I just told you? I told you I will protect you. I will take care of you. Nothing's going to happen. You're going to bring the Jewish people out miraculously. Yeah, but I don't speak so well. All right, let's play this again. Can you read my lips? I don't have lips, all right? Can you read my lips? I told you. Nothing bad is going to happen. What in the world are you asking me? I just told you. I have a lisp. It goes through the whole thing. So what's going on? Moshe Rabbeinu understands, according to astrology, he understands the Jewish people never get out. Right? So this is going on behind the scenes. He says they'll never get out. If the Jewish people will never get out, then why are you sending me? There's no purpose in this. They're never getting out. And he said, let me remind you, I created the heaven and the earth, right? Yes. I created Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing, right? Yes. That means I can do anything, right? Yeah. You can do anything. That means, can I change nature? Yes. You can change nature. God says, don't worry about it. I'm going to take them out miraculously. Miraculously. Because you're right. Right? God acknowledges. Moshe, baby, you're right. I can't take them out according to nature. Because according to nature, they'll never come out. You're right. But I can do anything. I can change time. I can make miracles. According to nature, they won't come out. So I'll take them out above nature. That's what he does. Yeah, that's exactly what he does. So that's what I would answer for that. Someone here says, I'm going to trust Hashem ways, want more clarity. We don't want more clarity. It's only one problem. Right? It's only one problem. What's the problem? What's the problem? We live in a world of Hester B'tok Hester Panim. We live in a world of hiddenness within hiddenness. Yeah? We don't see clarity. We don't have clarity in many things. Because we don't have clarity, we second guess. Right? And there's nothing worse than being in doubt. Right? That's what Amalek That's what Amalek brought to this world. They brought doubt, right? They brought absolute doubt to this world. So we want to have clarity. And you know what? There are other things we don't have clarity on, right? We for sure don't have clarity. So therefore, since we don't have clarity, we have doubts, right? We absolutely have doubts. And when we have doubts, there's nothing worse, right? Nobody wants to be in doubt. Somebody asked if I had proof that I descend from a Jewish woman, second great grandmother, and I both of her parents' Orthodox Hebrew gravestones. Ooh, in all birth certificates. That could be enough. That could be enough. Normally, you need a marriage certificate, which if you have a marriage certificate, that would be good from a grandmother, great grandmother. If you have proof a great grandmother buried in a Jewish cemetery, yeah, buried in a Jewish cemetery, that could be enough. You need really 3 or 4 generations. That could be enough. That could be enough proof. They could even say you probably are Jewish. They might make you go through a gerus chumrah, a stringent conversion, because maybe that is good enough proof. They won't say that, but they could tell you. They could tell you that better just go through a stringent conversion, and that would go much quicker. So, right, the two things that a person absolutely needs or would need is either a marriage certificate from a grandmother, great grandmother, which a lot of people can't necessarily produce, or buried 3, 4 generations in a Jewish cemetery. So if you have one of them, that could be enough. That could be enough, but a rabbinical court could and probably will make you go through Gerus Chumrah. Anyway, would they do that? Yeah. As a returnee to Judaism. Um, um, yeah. So if they wouldn't accept it 100%, as proof, okay, then you'd have to go through, conversion, but that would be a relatively short process, wouldn't be a long process, because that should be ample proof. Now, would they make you go through it without conversion? Depends. It depends. If that's enough proof, if that would be enough proof, let's say 3, 4 generations in a Jewish cemetery, they may make you go through it anyway, but that should be enough, right? Birth certificates. I don't know. Um, Birth certificate doesn't prove anything per se. That doesn't mean anything. What's more important than a birth certificate is a marriage certificate, right? In other words, if you had a Jewish marriage certificate from a grandmother, great grandmother, which not so easy to produce, but if you can produce that would be good, right? A birth certificate doesn't mean anything. That's not going to have so much proof, right? That won't prove really very much. But gravestone that would, that very well could be. So it could be either you wouldn't have to convert, or they would make you go through a quicker conversion, i.e. gerus chumrah, that you wouldn't have to go through the whole process. It would be a lot easier if that was the case. Uh, yeah. Any other questions? As if I had all birth certificates linking them to the great grandparent. Um, if you had all the birth certificates, yeah, if that great grandparent is determined to be Jewish, then that should be enough. That would be enough. Linking them. That should be enough. Yeah. Again, would a rabbinical court de facto say that? It could be. Very well could be. But to make sure there are no doubts, they may make a person, still go through gerus chumrah, do a stringent conversion. But if you add that documentation and they're all related and the first one is proven to be Jewish, then yeah, that should be enough. Should be enough. Again, would would they not make you go through gerus chumrah? I don't know. That I don't know. So the gravestone and all birth certificates linking the gravestone to show the matrilineal line. Um, Yeah, what if other generations practice other religions? That won't matter. Jewish status is not, it's not irrevocable, right? A Jew's a Jew. The question's going to be, there was a case where um, if somebody knew someone was still alive, was probably not the case, but if someone was still not alive and knew that grandparent or great grandparent, and they knew them to be Jews, living, living in a community, that very well could tip the scale. But I do know that even though that was a case where somebody had proof for that, the biblical court didn't want to say that was enough and made them go through, a conversion anyway. It should, again, if there would be people in that generation that knew them to be Jewish, yeah, that's even better, right? That's even better. But doesn't mean the biblical court's going to accept it where they wouldn't have to go through conversion, right? Now the question would be, would they tell that person to desecrate Shabbos? Yeah, maybe they wouldn't tell the person to desecrate Shabbos, but they're not going to consider them 100% Jewish unless they go through conversion, right? But probably not the case, right? Probably not the case. So in either, right, in either case, even if they practice different religions, if they knew them, let's say somebody knew them, in their city, they knew them to be Jewish, even if they practice different religion, that doesn't matter, right? A Jew is a Jew no matter what they do, right? Now the question is, do they have to know that they're Jewish and practicing Judaism in that place? I don't know. I don't know if they have to know that. They have to know that they're Jewish. But I'm telling you, even in such a case where they knew that they were Jewish, they didn't accept it either. Is it the case? And we have matrilineal relatives that are Orthodox Jews. Now, the fact that they're Orthodox Jews now, the proof itself has to be on that great grandmother or grandmother, whatever. If the proof is through them, through that person, and they are proven to be Jewish, even if their children aren't religious, right? Let's say, they have a daughter. That daughter's not religious. Yeah, and the granddaughter's not religious. Well, the great granddaughter is religious. Okay. Even if all of them weren't religious, let's say, and one of them comes back, if there is adequate proof that that grandmother, great grandmother is Jewish, then it doesn't matter if they're religious or not, they'd be Jewish, right? According to matrilineal descent. Yeah. In other words, if it's proven that this woman's Jewish, then whoever came out of her is Jewish also. As long as there's no intermarriage and whatever, right? That should be okay. Meaning that, let's say that this great grandmother had a daughter, that even if, let's say, they married a Jew, right? They have a son, let's say, and whatever is Jewish, marries a non-Jew. Yeah. So then you got a problem. Because then any children from there, even if the great grandmother's Jewish, those kids later on, are Jewish. But if they're Jewish, regardless if they practice different religion or not, if it's proven that the grandmother, great grandmother is Jewish, then yeah, then they would be Jewish regardless, right? Regardless of whether they're Orthodox, not Orthodox, they'd be proven to be Jewish, right? They shouldn't have to go through another conversion. Again, it depends on it depends what the rabbinical court's going to say. In that case, they shouldn't have to go through conversion. But I think rabbinical court's going to be extra cautious over here, and probably make them go through a stringent conversion anyway. But just to be extra cautious, because that doesn't hurt anybody. Going through the conversion doesn't hurt anybody, and not only that, it'll be a much quicker process, much quicker process, especially if the person's Orthodox. So it should go a lot quicker. Someone said there is proof in the Jewish article that death accounts, the line is fully matrilineal. So if that's the case, then if that is the case, then certainly buried in Jewish cemetery helps, but that certainly helps, and you wouldn't have to go through conversion, right? Again, if you went in front of a rabbinical court, they may tell you maybe you should do it, but probably not, right? You probably wouldn't have to, right? If you'd ask me, you probably wouldn't have to, but the bottom line is you want to clarify the status, right? 100% you want to clarify the status. So certainly going to rabbinical court is not going to hurt, right? At the very least, the person's Jewish and they don't have to go through conversion, right? Or they'll have to go through a stringent conversion. It's not going to take that long either way, right? That should be the case, but it doesn't hurt. Someone asks, how the Gior L'chumra look? If the person's not religious now. Um, well, if they're not religious, why would they go through a Gior L'chumra? Yeah, if they're religious and they see that they're religious and they're going in the right path, they've been religious, let's say for many years, they're not going to question it. Yeah, they still make them go through it. It'll just be a quicker process. If they are not religious, if they're not religious, they make it to them Jewish anyway, right? In other words, if they have the proof and they're not religious, it doesn't matter. The fact is, great grandmother's Jewish. They got proof for that, so they're Jewish, right? So they're Jewish. It doesn't matter if they're religious or not. A non-religious person is not going to want to go through Gerus Diploma, most likely, right? Someone explains to them, to just clarify the status. They'll say my great grandmother was Jewish. We have proof. That's enough. Okay, it'd be easier, right? Right? Because they want to return to Judaism now and become okay. That's certainly beneficial. That's certainly beneficial. So if they're coming back to Judaism, they're gonna try and make it, as easy as possible for them to try and come back, within the realm of Jewish law. So therefore they may tell them, okay, become a religious, very good. Just have a Gerus L'chumra, clarify the status, and you move on. Most people would want the status not to be in limbo. Yeah. Again, if the rabbinical comes back and says you don't have to go through conversion, very good. But again, even if you had to go through conversion, it wouldn't be very long. Wouldn't be a very long process at all. Yeah. Then you want to clarify that. A person would want to clarify the status, right? But again, they may not make you go through it. If you have enough proof, they shouldn't make you go through it. It could be it's just better just to have the status clear. Right? Even if you have all the proof and this and that, they may tell you, listen, you really don't have to go through it. Right? But it's probably better just so you have no doubts. Just so you have no doubts. How's it different? How's it different? It goes quicker. It goes much quicker. Yeah. They're not going to ask you to learn everything, this and that, and spend 2 years and, going through all these classes, whatever. They're going to want probably to learn with somebody, whatever, but they're not going to wait 2 years over here. It's going to be a much shorter process, right? Because you got the proof that you're Jewish, so why would they wait? Person doesn't have the knowledge. Okay, that I hear. You're going to make all kinds of mistakes. Okay, yeah. I don't know. I don't think they're going to wait 2 years for that, or 3 years till the person has enough knowledge. They're probably Jewish. Right, so they convert them, much easier as long as they're learning with someone and they're working hard to come back. Very good. Yeah, it'll be a much shorter process. I'm not going to make them go through all these classes before they convert. They wouldn't do that. Probably not. I spoke before. It's in their best interest to do it. Right? It would be they would have the status of a Baal Tshuva. Yeah, someone who's Jewish. They know that they're Jewish and they come back. Right, so. They start keeping whatever they know, and then they start learning. So it'll be the same thing. You have the status of a Baal Tshuva, right, and come back. So Gerus L'chumra, all that does is just clarifies the status, but you would really have the status of a Baal Tshuva. So they're not going to stop that, and say, well, we're not really sure. You got to, if there's ample proof, they'd convert them pretty quick. Yeah, but again, that means the person's going to have to learn or whatever. Very good. So it'll take time, right? But they're not going to stretch it out. They're not going to, even if you don't have knowledge, it doesn't matter. They're not going to stretch it out because most likely you get the proof that you're Jewish. They're just doing it as a formality because you probably are Jewish anyway, right? And so it's more like a formality. So why would they not do it, right? It's just to clarify the status, but it's not going to make someone jump through hoops to do it. It's a much easier process, much shorter process. You have to know, you have to keep, you have to keep Shabbos, you have to keep the holidays, you have to know blessings and kashrut. Okay, so you got to get a crash course what to do, but they're not gonna lengthen it out and make a person take 2 years or whatever, even if they don't live within a walking distance of an Orthodox synagogue for that. No, they want to clarify the status. Yeah, or the person wants to get married. Yeah, what if they want to get married? Why lengthen the process? This is where you get ample proof, and it sounds like you have ample proof. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't stretch it out, right? They would not stretch that out. That's what they would do. They give people basic information, what they need to do, set up, tutors for them or whatever, and convert them. It shouldn't take very long at all, right? It's very, if a person doesn't have adequate proof, that's a different issue. If there's adequate proof, they're only going to do a Gerus L'Chumrah anyway for the sake of what? For clarifying the status. But they don't really even need to do that, right? They're just making it easy for the person so there are no questions in the future. That's the only thing, right? That's that's the only thing. They're making it a lot easier. They should make it a lot easier. I've never heard of a Gerus L'Chumrah taking like more than a few months at most. Once they clarify the status, no reason to wait. And all that again, all that does is just make it easier. Just clarifies the status. But then, okay, so then they have to learn. Very good. Yeah, I'm not going to wait. Say, oh, you're going to make all the mistakes. It's going to be a lot worse later. They're not going to do that because you have ample proof. If you don't have ample proof, they won't go through that. Right? They wouldn't go through it. What's the most important thing to know about muksa? What's the most important thing? What's the important thing to know is what you're allowed to touch, not allowed to touch, and when you're allowed to touch, when you're allowed to move them. When you're allowed to move things that you're not allowed to move. Yeah. What are the cases you're allowed to move things? Or not allowed to move things? That's probably the most important thing. Right, mine were conversos. Okay, but they're not Jewish in the end. There's a big difference. Yeah. They're not Jewish in the end. So even though they were conversos, it doesn't matter. In fact, if the mother, grandmother, whatever, down the line isn't Jewish, so that ruins the whole line. Right? That's not the case over here. Here they got ample they have ample proof. That's a different issue. Right? It's a different issue. Doesn't originate from Torah, no, it's rabbinical. Muktzah is totally rabbinical. But should go through conversion if you weren't raised observant. No, you don't have to. The only reason a person would have to go through conversion is if they were conceived, let's say there's a case where if a person, let's say, father was a non-Jew, mother was a Jew, child technically is Jewish, right? Now the Gemara says the child is puzzle, is blemished. Says one opinion is it's mamzer because forbidden relationship. But halachically speaking, we hold that the child from such a union is a Jew. Now it's a Jew with a blemish on the soul. Now in that case, I asked my Rebbe this question: what would happen? Do they have to go through conversion? And in this case, he said, we would tell people to do so. But that's if the father was a non-Jew and the mother was a Jew. Let's say both parents were Jews and they didn't practice family purity laws. Yeah, you don't have to go through conversion. There's no conversion needed. Definitely no conversion needed. Yeah, different reasons, but it's not the point, right? Conversion would not be, for Baal Tshuva, it wouldn't be needed. Yeah. Even if someone's a mamzer, right? And pretty much 99% of mamzers today don't have a problem, right? Because most likely there was never any proper kedushin, there weren't any kosher witnesses by the wedding, so it wasn't really considered a marriage. So that knocks out probably 99% of the cases. But in either case, Baal Tshuva would not have to go through conversion. Unless there's some faulty conversion somewhere down the line where then you would have to. Right, then that calls into question the status. But if it doesn't call into question the status, you won't have to go through conversion. The only case, as we said before, if you have the father's not Jewish and the mother's Jewish, that means the child's Jewish. Okay, so if the child's Jewish, very good. It's got a blemish on the soul. Now, according to that, does that child growing up have to go through conversion? It's better if they do get that blemish off their soul by going to the mikveh properly, right? But if they don't, they don't. They have that blemish on the soul. How to get rid of the blemish? I don't know. Keep Torah mitzvahs the best you can, right? But my Rebbe told me, he said, if someone came in front of us, we tell them, go to the mikveh. Go in front of 3 people, do it, for the sake of conversion. Whatever. But not everyone holds that. Definitely not everyone holds that. It's a good thing to do, but not everyone holds that. When I became a priest, okay. I have know somebody, yeah, let's say, they're getting older. They were getting older, they married someone. The condition of getting married was this Jew had to convert to Christianity. That was the condition. So somebody said, someone said, wow, this person's not going to know anything about either religion, which is true, which is very true. Converting to Christianity, for, male or female, doesn't matter. You pour a little bit of water on you, you get wet. That doesn't mean anything. You're still a Jew. 100%, you're still a Jew. You can't sell them, any living product on Passover. Can't lend them with interest. I mean, a lot of things. You can't do that. They have status of a Jew, right? And, again, in this case, if the father was a non-Jew, should a person go through a proper conversion in the end? They should. They have to. They don't have to. But there's a blemish on the soul. There's definitely a blemish on the soul. And yet you're returning back to Judaism, yeah. But again, you have a blemish on the soul. In that case, if a person, both parents were Jewish, nothing to do. You don't have to go to the mikvah. There's nothing. There's no issue, right? There's no issues, no conversions, no nothing, right? 100%. Listen, you go through enough. If you go through enough, you're like, okay, so you do what you have to do, right? You do what you have to do. Are children from a raped Jewish female by Hamas on 9/7 a Jew? Yeah. If the woman was a Jew and the kid's a Jew, yeah. Now, in that case, there are rabbinical authorities at a certain point would tell them, yeah, get an abortion for that. They don't have to keep the child, right? But if the mother's a Jew, and there's no question that the mother's a Jew, no matter, who fathered the child, the child's a Jew. Yeah, again, even if it's a non-Jew, the child's a Jew. So we said before, the blemish doesn't matter whether they're raped or not raped, it doesn't matter. Right? Even if it's done, with even if they both agree. They both agree it's still a blemish on the child. To say this is the worst blemish. Okay. But the status is the same. Child will be Jewish. Child will be Jewish. And if a woman want to have an abortion, she'd be allowed to. Right? Most cases should be allowed to. Yeah, some people may say I want to carry the child. I don't know why. I don't know why, but I don't think, I think a lot of rabbinical authorities say, if they knew from the very beginning, they could abort the child. Yeah, they wouldn't have the child. Person reminded of that child, and how they had that child. Yeah, they could definitely abort it. So at a certain point. Right? It could be even later, according to some rabbinical authorities. Even later, once they didn't know they were pregnant. They said, I find 6 weeks later they're pregnant. Yeah. That's already an entity. It's already a living entity. It's 40 days. You got 40 days. But, in that case, it's going to cause mental anguish to the mother. Yeah, I think most rabbinic authorities would permit it. I think definitely most rabbinic authorities would permit it. Yeah, maybe it's trying to say, Saddam Hussein said, I'm hanging in there. Yeah. Listen, imagine you had, grandkids, great grandkids from Haman that were sitting learning Torah in Bnei Brak. Go figure. Go figure. So, I don't know how these things work, in general, but yeah, rape's a pretty serious thing. Definitely a pretty serious thing. Yeah, let me see any other questions. I would answer that. Just women are allowed to have an abortion, ain't that murder? It's murder. You're right, it's murder. Under certain circumstances, they'd be allowed to. Certain circumstances, not across the board. Not across the board. If it's they didn't want to get pregnant or whatever, they want to abort the child, that's not good enough reason. Right? If psychologically it would cause serious problems, there are rabbinic authorities that would permit. Because the woman would go to pieces. What? A woman shouldn't have, if a potential woman's going to have a nervous breakdown, because of this, and she's not going to function. Totally, again, you have to psychologically evaluate. It's not giving a one-shot answer here, but if it's determined, this woman will become totally unstable and not function and this and that, you could, right? In some cases, you could abort the child because you destroy the woman in the process. I'm not saying, I don't want to get pregnant. I shouldn't have got pregnant. No, that's not good enough reason. Or people say, I don't have enough money. That doesn't matter. That's not an issue, right? That's not an issue to get an abortion. Yeah. What about if a person found out later in the pregnancy, like a friend of mine had, child didn't have a brain stem. Child's going to be severely deformed and not live very long. Rebbe told him to have the child. Now, a friend of mine asked, he has 2 daughters. Rebbe has 2 daughters. It should be well. And he asked, would you say the same thing to your 2 daughters? And one I would have said yes, one I would have said abort the child. If it would have caused too much anguish. That is criteria to abort. But again, it has to be determined. You have to have people in the know what they're doing, how they evaluate it, right? It's not across the board to say, oh, yeah, she's the one who has a child, psychologically unstable. If she psychologically could be unstable or would be unstable, that's not a small thing. So that we would not look at as murder, right? In some cases, you tell them to have a child anyway, right? It depends, right? It depends. In most cases, if you can determine that's going to cause unbelievable anguish to the mother, in general, that would be enough to have an abortion. Would be enough. But again, it has to be determined by the right people, and it's not a fly-by-night, type of thing. They have to evaluate. If they see this woman will never function and it's going to cause her all kinds of anguish, not just because she didn't want to have a child, but she's just going to go to pieces. Who says there's a mitzvah to have that child? You can tell me it's murder. Good. Yeah, good question. It's murder. Yeah, he killed the mother in the process. Not literally. She go to pieces. Yeah, the whole family go to pieces at that point. Yeah. But they have 3, 4, 5 kids. They have this child now. They have this child gonna be totally deformed. All kinds of issues. And their mother gonna go totally pieces, ruin the entire family. Destroy the entire family. Be a mitzvah in that case. But again, it has to be determined that way. Right? You have to have big rabbinic authorities to determine that. Right? It's not just, she's going to have a hard time. You have a hard time having a child anyway. Right? This could be, multiplied by infinity what it could do. Right? But I'm not saying in every case. In every case, you're allowed to get an abortion. But remember, my Rebbe, who was the Torah giant of the generation, held for one of his kids in 7th month, he would have told her to abort the child because she would have gone to pieces. She absolutely would have gone to pieces. She wouldn't have been able to handle it. Yeah? It depends. It depends on the circumstances. Yeah, in some cases, yes, some cases, no. But even in a case where you would be allowed to do it, it's not called murder. You're saving the mother in the process. It's totally different. Wouldn't be, in theory, it'd be murder, but we wouldn't look at it that way. We're not looking at it that way. Somebody asks if the father is Kohen and the mother's not Jewish. Child converts. Can child be a Kohen? No. No. Right? Even if the father's Jewish and the mother's not, the mother goes through conversion, yeah? The mother has a child, yeah, with this Kohen. Well, it's a problem either way because the Kohen can't marry her. Kohen can't marry a convert. So it's really a moot point, right? Really a moot point. It'll never happen. It's an impossibility because first of all, Kohen can't be with a non-Jew, but even the non-Jew converts, Kohen can't marry a divorcee or cannot marry a convert, right? So that even if God forbid they were married, right? Torah prohibition every time they're intimate, that child's not a Kohen for sure. That child would never be a Kohen. But anyway, it's a moot point because he can't marry anyway, right? He's not even a mamzer. Right. Nothing, right? Child can convert, right? Child can convert, but the child will never be a Kohen. Right? Child will absolutely never be a Kohen. Right? Because it's a convert. Convert can't be a Kohen. Or a Levi, right? Child, that Levi, that convert will be Yisrael, be like everybody else. Will not have the opportunity to be a Kohen or a Levi or a Levite, no matter how righteous they are. After the mother child changes you. Okay, but Again, that may be true. That may be true, but some people 100% would absolutely go to pieces having such a child. Yeah, they would absolutely go to pieces. Now, some people would grow through it tremendously and make them who they are, define who they are by having such a child. True. Other people could kill them. There are people, by the way, they have Down, let's say later in life, they have Down syndrome, they have Down syndrome child, right? There are people who don't want to raise them because of stigma in their family. I know someone who has a child like that adopted a child pretty much because the parents didn't, the child knows who the real parents are, but they didn't want to have the stigma of raising a child. Not just because of all the doctor's appointments and all that. They didn't want to have the stigma for whatever reason. They didn't want to raise this child. So they gave up the child to someone else, foster. So a friend of mine fosters. Yeah. Yeah. They had the child. They did not give birth to the child. They had the child. Yeah, but they didn't want to raise it. So from a very young age, a friend of mine fostered this child. Now this child's what, 21, 22? Yeah, very high functioning. I don't know if she get married. Not interested in getting married yet, but but very high functioning. They see the parents however often they see the real parents. Whatever it is, they know they're the real parents. But yeah, they didn't want it. Parents had the child. They could have aborted the child, I guess. They didn't want to. So they had the child, but they want to raise it. That was what's worse. Yeah. Let's just be allowed to have an abortion. Okay. Well, that's it. But they had the child, and now they don't want to raise the child because of the way it looks and other things, because of their status. I'm not going to judge that. I'm not judging that. Right? It's a hard thing to bring up such a child. It's a hard thing, the whole family structure. Bring up such a child. Give up the child for adoption, that's their choice. Yeah, that's a choice. Mr. Cohen wanted to marry a Jewish convert. Yeah, I thought it could because he was a Cohen. I told him the truth, his deathbed, he was able to marry her. I don't know why. Right? If he was a real Cohen, can't marry a convert or divorcing. It's forbidden. So someone told a friend of mine once who's a Kohen and said, so if I marry a divorcee or a convert, no big deal. So my kids won't be Kohanim. So a friend of mine said, I mentioned this before, a friend of mine said, no, that's not the biggest problem. Right? That's not the biggest problem that your kids are not Kohanim. Right? The biggest problem is every time you're intimate with your spouse, that means you're over Torah prohibition. Torah prohibition every time you're intimate. That's the problem. Right? That is the problem. So you marry the wrong person in that case. Whatever. It's a problem. Forbidden. It's forbidden to marry such a person. The kids will not be Kohanim. Okay. Yeah. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is every time they're intimate, it's a forbidden relationship. It's a Torah prohibition. Right? Probably bought his Kohen papers. Yeah, probably. Probably. I mean, it's kind of a silly thing. Think about it. The person says, oh, look, this is the worst problem. This is the worst part of the problem. No, it's not. Yeah. Worst thing is my kid won't be a Kohen. No, that's not the worst problem. That's definitely not the worst problem. But whatever, this comes up. This comes up. Imagine a Kohen's not really so religious. Marries a non-Jew. They have kids, and then he gets interested in religion. She gets interested, wants to convert. Now what do you do? Now what do you do in such a situation? Now you got to now if she converts, so he can't be married to her. Yeah, and even if she doesn't convert, he can't be married to her. He can't be with her. Yeah, I'm sure these cases have come up, but there's no way around it. I'm kind of stuck in that case. But that's kind of like, almost like an oxymoron, right? Right. So here, he becomes religious. She wants to convert, and now they mess themselves up in the process because now he can't stay married to her. Yeah, life's irony, God's irony, so to speak. All right, I'm going to stop here. There probably won't be a class next week because of Hanukkah, probably the week after also. But anyway, anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook. I am Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There you got videos on Q&As, ethics of our fathers, Book of Leviticus. Want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman@gmail.com.